Good evening. Good evening. I'm John Miko, the president of Founding Forward. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's Liberty Series, Jack Templeton Liberty Series program tonight. Founding Forward, of course, is the nonprofit charity of the Union League of Philadelphia, and we are out every day to create better citizen leaders through educational programs like tonight's program, like all the great programs we have at our Valley Forge campus and at Liberty Hill. And we do it only through your generosity. So I thank you for that generosity. It is what makes us run, and what is going to make us run bigger and better. And I thank you in advance for your generosity. A few housekeeping items for tonight. Of course, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. We will have questions at the end of the program. Please just raise your hand. We'll do this via microphone. And please do raise your hand as people are asking other questions so that we can see that you have a question. So don't be afraid. Just put your hand up. We will see that and we'll get to you as soon as we can. A couple of upcoming programs. This coming Monday, a week from now, we have a Civil War Roundtable, The Lincoln Miracle, the 1860 convention that changed history, with Edward Acorn, and then another Civil War Roundtable on April 10th, Civil War Roundtable, Anti-Slavery Parliamentarians Who Helped Elect Lincoln, with John Grinspan. So we look forward to seeing you at those programs. We're taking a little break because we are doing Good Citizen Day and lots of other student programs over the next couple of weeks. So now to introduce our program is one of the great, generous leaders of Founding Forward and of the Union League, a charter member of Founding Forward, a member of the board of directors, my friend, Mr. Jeff Denton. Jeff.
Dr. Marian L. Tupy is the founder and editor of humanprogress.org and a senior fellow at the Cato Institute's Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity. He is the co-author of the book 10 Global Trends Every Smart Person Should Know and the Simon Abundance Index, measuring the relationship between resources and population. His articles have been published in the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, the UK Spectator, Foreign Policy, and various other outlets around the world. He has appeared on BBC, CNN, CNBC, Fox Business, and other channels. Tupy received his BA in International Relations and Classics from the University of Johannesburg, South Africa, and his PhD in International Relations from the University of St. Andrews in the United Kingdom. His latest book, Superabundance, the story of population growth, innovation, and human flourishing on an infinitely bountiful planet, won the Julian L. Simon Memorial Award in 2023 and the Leonard E. Reed Book Award in 2024. Founding Forward is honored to welcome Dr. Marian Tupy.
No? Now I can. Can I be seen? Obviously. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I am absolutely overwhelmed by the space. It's glorious. And thank you for coming. You could have been doing many other things with your evening, so I appreciate you being here. At 35-minute mark, can somebody just start waving like a crazy person at me so I know to shut up? At any rate, let's start. Oops. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, my talk today is about resources and specifically about human ability to expand our resource base into infinity. Infinity will form a big part of my talk, so please just bear it in mind. The basic premise of my talk is that more people have more ideas lead to more innovations, more innovations lead to productivity gains, and more productivity gains lead to higher standards of living. And those standards of living are indeed greater than even the kings and queens of yesteryear could have imagined. The connection between population growth, new ideas, new inventions, and prosperity is a well-trodden territory endorsed by Nobel Prize-winning economists like Paul Romer, Robert Lucas, and Michael Kramer. Unfortunately, the beneficial relationship between the number of people and human well-being is not universally accepted.
The great under-discussed factor in the climate crisis is there are just too many of us, and we use too much shit. Climate deniers like to say, there's no population problem, just look out the window of an airplane, something but empty space down there. But it's not about space, it's about resources. Humans are already using 1.7 times the resources the planet can support. In 1900, there were less than 2 billion people on Earth. Now it's approaching 8. We can't just keep going on like this. The world is just too crowded.
There are not enough people. I can't emphasize this enough. There are not enough people. I think one of the biggest risks to civilization is the low birth rate and the rapidly declining birth rate. And yet so many people, including smart people, think that there are too many people in the world and think that the population is growing out of control. It's completely the opposite.
There's scientific consensus that the lives of children are going to be very difficult, and it does lead, I think, young people to have a legitimate question. You know, is it okay to still have children?
So let's see if we can help her answer that question. People have been wondering about the relationship between population growth and resources for a very long time. In 1798, a British preacher and economist, Thomas Malthus, in his essay on population, claimed to have shown mathematically that resources grow at a linear rate, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whereas population grows at an exponential rate, 1, 2, 4, 16, 32. Population being the red line and resources being the blue line. And the difference between the two growth rates, he believed, must necessarily lead to shortages of resources and consequently starvation and population collapse. The debate about the relationship between population growth and resources reached a fever pitch in the second half of the 20th century when the populations of third world countries, especially in Asia and later in Africa, exploded primarily due to better health care and better scientific knowledge and better medical care. In 1968, the Stanford University biologist Paul Ehrlich, he is still alive, I believe he's 93 years old, picked up the baton of overpopulation concerns from Malthus in his best-selling book, The Population Bomb. In the book, he wrote, "The battle to feed all of humanity is over. In the 1970s, hundreds of millions of people will starve to death in spite any crash programs embarked upon now." Ehrlich scared and scarred generations of Americans with his ideas being turned into feature films such as the 1973 offering The Soylent Green. In the movie, there are so many people and so little food that every time a person dies, he or she is turned into a biscuit, which is then fed to the people who are still alive. This is the original poster. Note the year in the top left-hand corner. This is what people in the 70s, maybe some people here actually remember the 1970s, thought America would look like in 2025. Well, it is 2025, and we are still not eating each other. Instead of starvation, we have abundance of choices. I picked this particular picture because it reminds me of my trips to Whole Foods when I have to choose between Italian, Greek, Californian, Portuguese and Spanish olive oil. I have to make a choice between light virgin and extra virgin robust. Then I have to choose between cold press. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds really good. So, in fact, food supply has improved dramatically throughout the world, and famines have disappeared from the world outside of war zones. So whereas tens of millions of people used to die due to famines, that is no longer the case. When there is a shortage of food, countries can either purchase food from abroad, which is delivered very speedily via the marvels of today's transport, or alternatively, they are given that food in terms of food aid. Bottom line, no more famines outside of war zones. Now, in Superabundance, in our book, we attempt to quantify the growing abundance of commodities by looking at their prices. A rising price of a commodity implies that there is a shortage of this commodity. If you have something less of, then the price will rise, whereas a falling price of a commodity implies growing abundance. And prices reflect the behavior and expectations of 8 billion people. So in a sense, you can think about the global marketplace as a giant calculator which provides just-in-time, best possible estimates with regards to what is and what is not scarce. Question is, which prices to use? You are all familiar with nominal price. Believe it or not, you all know what nominal price is. Every time you go to a shop and you pick up a loaf of bread, that's the nominal price. That's the current price. That's the price at the moment. But this is a sophisticated audience, and so you know that if you are looking at prices over time, you have to adjust for inflation. To get a sense of whether something is getting more or less expensive, you have to adjust for inflation. I chose this particular picture. It tells you how important inflation is, because this is actually a loaf of bread being sold in Germany in 1922 during hyperinflation, and this particular loaf of bread cost 1,000 billion Deutschmarks. So inflation matters, and you always have to take it into account. Now, the third kind of price, the kind of price that I'll be talking about, is called the time price. What is a time price? Well, nominal price and real price suffer from a very important drawback. They do not account for what is happening in your wallet. You all have grandparents who told you, oh, when I was a young person, you know, a gallon of gas cost only 50 cents. Yes, true, but you are also making $4 an hour, right? So time price basically allows you to take into account not just what is happening in terms of prices, but also what is happening in terms of your income. Time price is calculated by dividing the nominal price of a good, such as the loaf of bread in a store, by the nominal hourly wage that you are earning at the time of a purchase. Whereas nominal and real prices are determined in dollars and cents, time prices are determined in minutes and hours of labor. In order to explain how this works, let's just look at one example. In 1980, a loaf of bread cost 50 cents. In 2025, it cost $1.93. So in terms of nominal price, the price of bread has increased by close to 300%. But again, we have to adjust for inflation. So 50 cents in 1980 was equivalent to $2.04 in January 2025. But we know that bread only cost $1.93, and consequently we can say that bread got 5% cheaper. Okay? Big difference between almost 300% more expensive and 5% cheaper. Now let's do the time price. Back in 1980, bread, once again, cost only 50 cents. But a typical hourly wage of a blue-collar worker was $6.57. And that means that our typical blue-collar worker had to work 4 minutes and 4.57 minutes in order to buy bread. By 2025, the bread price once again increased to $1.93, but hourly wages have increased to $31, which means that bread now costs only 3.76 minutes of labor, which means that in reality, the abundance of bread got 18% cheaper. Recently, I looked at 42 different food items, again from the perspective of a blue-collar worker, somebody making a car in Detroit, for example, over a period between 1919 and 2024. Why 1919? For no obvious reason, except that's what the government happened to have, the statistics for 1919, and then I compared it to last year. This is just a small section of the study which I did. Please don't panic, we are not going to go over that. We will be focusing on just one item, and that's the price of eggs, because price of eggs actually became something of a political dynamite in the last election. So, dozen eggs in 1919, they cost 61 cents. At the end of 2024, I was able to find on Walmart, I believe in Cincinnati, which is, for a variety of reasons, that's where you're supposed to look. It's right in the middle of the country. Anyway, a dozen eggs was $1.96. So in terms of nominal price, it increased by 220%. But in terms of time prices, our blue-collar worker back in 1919 had to work 1 hour and 43 minutes in order to earn a dozen eggs. But by 2024, he or she would have to work only 0.05 hours, which means that the price of eggs over that period between 1919 and 2024 fell by 96%, which means that the same amount of labor that got you 1 dozen eggs in 1919 now gets you almost 27 dozen eggs today. Your abundance of eggs has increased by 2,500%, and your eggs abundance doubles every 21 years. So if the current trends continues, then in 21 years you will have not 27 eggs, you will have 52 dozen eggs for the same amount of time. You get the picture. Now, this is just the United States, but something similar has been happening globally. This is a look at the time prices of global commodities between 1980 and 2018. This comes from the book, so it's a little bit dated, but I want to give you a certain flavor of what's been happening. Why 1980? That's because that's the notional start of globalization. That's when China and many other countries enter the global economy. You have many more people, you have much greater economic growth. So if you have more people and more economic growth, we should have scarcer resources, right? But in fact, the opposite has happened. In this particular study, we look at 50 different commodities. I'm only showing you a few of them because otherwise you wouldn't be able to read it. But on average, these commodities, be they food or fuel or minerals or metals, fell in time price by 72%, which means that personal abundance of these 50 commodities over the period of globalization increased by 252%, or put differently, instead of 1 unit in this particular basket of commodities, you could now afford 3.5 units. So once again, in spite of greater economic growth, things are becoming more and more affordable. In our book, we looked at 18 different data sets, with some of them going back to 1850. We have measured hundreds of different commodities, including food, finished products, raw materials, and even some services. Now, on the horizontal line, you have the increase in population, and on the vertical line, you have the increase in personal abundance. There is nothing below zero, because in no case did we find a data set which would show commodities becoming more expensive or less abundant. Everything in our book, once again, hundreds of different commodities, has been becoming more abundant. But abundance can grow at 2 different speeds. So look at the 45-degree line. Let's assume that that's 2% growth in population. If it's 2% growth in population and 2% growth in abundance, then you would expect all the data points to be along the 45-degree line. Or put differently, if population grows at 2% but your abundance is only increasing at 1%, you would find the data in the area, the light blue area of increasing abundance. The dark blue area of superabundance, that tells you that if population increases at 2%, abundance is increasing at 3% or more, okay? And in all the cases that we looked at, our abundance was increasing at a superabundant rate, which is to say, at a higher rate than population growth. So if you recall this particular chart that frightened Malthus, the reality looks something like this. It is resources which are increasing at a faster rate than population, and the gap between the two rates of growth, that's the new knowledge which is created in human mind. Put differently, every one of us on average produces more than we consume. In our model, we start with the overall population. Only a small share of humanity actually invents or innovates anything, so the more people you have, the more likely it is that one of them will turn out to be a space alien like Elon Musk, or somebody else who can create rockets and then catch them back down. So overall population matters. You get geniuses such as this guy, Patrick Bell, who developed one of the first machines to bring in wheat, which over the next 100 years has underwent a lot of different innovations until you end up with a modern combine harvester, which then makes bread much cheaper and much more abundant. Of course, population is not all that matters. If population was all that mattered, then China would have been the richest country in the world for the last 2,200 years, since China's unification back 200 BC. In fact, what matters is population and freedom. China used to be dirt poor, and it's only after the economic liberalization of the late 1970s that the creative juices of the Chinese people have been unleashed, and they were able to turn a very poor country into a relatively wealthy one. So the question then becomes, if we have accomplished all of that, can superabundance continue? Now, in our book, we talk about an infinitely bountiful planet, which may seem counterintuitive because, in fact, there are currently only a limited number of atoms on the planet. And in fact, most people would probably agree with the American ecologist Kenneth Boulding, who says that anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist. Well, what I'm going to suggest to you is that from a wealth-creating perspective, the number of atoms matters very little. This is a Lamborghini Huracan worth $250,000, and this is a Lamborghini Huracan worth only $5,000. Note that the number of atoms is exactly the same, but they've been arranged differently. The first one intelligently, and the second one chaotically. So it's really human intelligence that is vital in order to grow our resource pie. Human intelligence can grow resource pie infinitely. Here are some of the ways in which we can accomplish it. First, increased supply. When a price of a commodity goes up, that produces an opportunity for profit. You go around the world in search of new deposits of oil, lithium, gas, and whatever else, which is why today, after 120 years of using oil, we have more known oil deposits than we had 120 years ago. Second way to increase supply is through technological breakthroughs. Fracking is a perfect example. Number of wells, be they of oil or gas, have become uneconomical. But with fracking, which is to say new technology, you can now frack for oil and gas in those kinds of environments and still get a lot of wealth. Similarly, electric arc furnaces are allowing us to recycle metal much more easy, which is why the total amount of iron which is used in the United States is decreasing, because we are now so efficient at recycling. Haber-Bosch, synthetic process or process of synthetic creation of fertilizer. In the old days, we used to use human and animal excrement. Later, we used guano. But if we used only those natural products in order to fertilize our fields, half of us would have to die. 4 billion people would have to die. But with the Haber-Bosch process, which uses ammonia, which is derived from natural gas, we are able to feed 8 billion people. So here you can see how a technological progress can increase anything from oil production to gas production to iron production to food production. We can also increase efficiency. We do it in two different ways, one relative and the other absolute. Relatively, a can of Coke, for example, used to weigh 3 ounces of aluminum. Now it weighs only half an ounce of aluminum. Now we still use a lot of aluminum on year-on-year basis because we are drinking more Cokes, right? We are using more aluminum because we are drinking more Coca-Colas. But relatively, each Coca-Cola is getting, a can is getting more and more, uses less and less commodity. Something similar we are seeing in terms of plastic bottles. They are now weighing about half as much plastic as they used to before. Even glass bottles are quarter more efficient than they used to be. So that's relative savings, but there are also absolute savings. According to Ido Wernick, who is a researcher at the Rockefeller University, he has looked at the absolute consumption of 100 commodities in the United States. What do I mean by absolute? Let's say that in 2025 we use 25 million tons of iron. I have no idea how much iron we are using, but let's assume that's the case. If in 10 years' time we are using 24,000 tons of irons, that means that the absolute amount of iron that we are using has actually fallen. I'm sure that I hope that you follow with me. Anyway, the point is that when Ido Wernick looked at 100 most commonly used commodities in the United States, he realized that in 41 cases, we have reached post-peak. So, put it differently, for the longest time, American economy and consumption of materials would be going parallel to each other. But about 20 years ago, what started happening was that there was a decoupling of economic growth from resource use. We are using ever fewer resources, but our GDP per capita is continuing to increase. We can increase value from a commodity. A perfect example of that is something like sand. When we first melted sand to create glass, we used it for glass beads or jars or windows. And today, of course, we are using glass in fiber optic cables and also in microchips. So you can see that with every step of the way, we have increased the value from something as simple as sand. In a similar way, we used lithium in ceramics. Now we are using lithium ion in our batteries. Once again, we have moved from ceramics to something which is much more sophisticated, much more expensive, such as lithium-ion batteries. In a similar way, we use graphite in pencils. Now we are using graphene, which is a type of that commodity in building aircraft. So pencil, 10 cents, aircraft, $200 million, basically the same product. We are also turning that which used to be useless into that which is useful. When we first started digging for oil, we would encounter this substance that we now refer to as natural gas, and if you weren't careful, if you lit a cigarette, then you would blow up the entire rig and your comrades. Now what we are doing is, and so we used to flare it. In other words, we used to burn it. It was wasteful, but it was also incredibly environmentally damaging. Now we are capturing all that gas and we are heating our homes with it. In the similar vein, petroleum was a nightmare for the farmers. Now we are using it in order to power our cars and so forth. So in a way you could say that everything is useless. Everything is useless. All the commodities, all the materials on earth are useless unless you have technology that actually needs it. Only then something like that becomes useful. A very important concept in economics is substitution. We don't care how we get to read our book in the evening, by what kind of light. We just care that we have that light. And in the past, we used to read our books by candlelight, and candles were made from whale oil or sometimes from whale brains, which contain a substance called spermaceti. And so we would slaughter these animals in order to be able to read books. Now, of course, we are using lamps, we are using electricity, what have you. In the similar vein, we used wood for much of our industrial revolution and industrial period. And that led to a massive deforestation of Western nations. Today, we have more forests in America and in Western Europe than we've had for the last 200 years. Why? Because we stopped using wood. Now we have started using coal, and we are phasing that out and replacing it by natural gas. Another type of substitution, animal fur. We are no longer, well, most of us no longer use that. Instead, we have synthetics. Another type of substitution would be something like sodium-ion batteries instead of lithium-ion. You'll hear very often, how are we going to power all of these electric vehicles? We are not going to have enough lithium. Well, who is to say that we'll need lithium in 20 years' time? Maybe it will be sodium-ion batteries that we'll be using. So substitution is a very important concept in economics. Dematerialization, this thing here is not just a phone, it's also a map, it's also a notepad, it's also a gosh, I don't know what it is, notepad, it's a TV, it's a camera. So in other words, instead of a huge pile of things that you would have to build out of atoms, you have this thing over here. We have dematerialized a number of functions which would previously need resources. 15 years ago, if you walked into an American hotel, there would be a thick blue copper cable running from the wall that you would have to plug into your computer in order to get internet. Now we are doing it with Wi-Fi. In other words, we have totally removed any kind of physical atoms from the process. We are getting Wi-Fi through, well, whatever it is, air. Our maps have been replaced by Waze. Our vinyl records have been replaced by streaming. Once again, not using anything at all. It's a miracle. We also do a lot of reuse, which is to say that we can use materials to do something and then take that material and then do something else. Very famously, during the Manhattan Project, the American government gave Oppenheimer and his crowd 14,000 tons of silver in order to produce electromagnets for enriching of uranium. And after they were done, they returned all that silver to the American government, which now can use it for something else. If at some point in time we suddenly realize that we have forgotten how to make, I don't know, steel, we could tear down some of the ugly buildings that we have all over the world and use that steel to reuse it. So we reuse a lot of stuff. Transmutation. Okay, so this used to be a stuff of stories, stuff of well, crazy talk. A lot of strange people would be going around the Western world claiming that they can turn base metals into expensive or precious metals. Well, as a matter of fact, we know how to do transmutation. It's no longer a stuff of science fiction or a stuff of stories. It's real. For example, if you take methane and you heat it up to very high temperatures, you get carbon vapor, which then deposits one layer on top of each other until you get a diamond which is indistinguishable from natural diamond. It's the same consistency, the same chemistry, the same strength, which is why the price of natural diamonds is actually collapsing. Because now you can actually provide your beloved with a huge diamond ring on relatively cheaply. And that's the most expensive, mineral, which means that other minerals can be created by using similar methods. We can also transmute base metals into precious metals. Many years ago, back in the early 1980s, we used neutron bombardment in order to turn lead into gold. Now, if we did that today, it would take quadrillions of dollars in order to produce an ounce of gold, because energy is incredibly expensive. But if we can figure out energy which is too cheap to meter, if, for example, we can figure out how to do fusion in a cost-effective way, then, of course, anything is possible. And finally, when it comes to transmutation, it is very important to remember that all the metals which we have on Earth have not been born on Earth. They have come from, well, the universe. The Big Bang only produced hydrogen. Hydrogen then got heated to spectacular temperatures and got compressed to a spectacular degree inside of stars, which when they blew up, when they went supernova, they spread all of these materials around the universe. So if you have fusion and if you have hydrogen, then you should be theoretically able to make any kind of metal, any kind of material whatsoever. Ultimately, everything can be reduced to hydrogen plus fusion. And our oceans are filled with hydrogen, HO2, and 73% of our planet is covered by it. And we are on the cusp of making fusion, so ultimately, hopefully, we'll be able to tackle that problem as well and increase our resources into infinity. But of course, by that time, or within the next few decades, let alone hundreds of years, we may well become a spacefaring civilization. We could send humanoid robots. You have all seen pictures of things like Elon Musk's, what is it called, Optimus. You power it with AI and a solar energy, and you can send armies of these robots into an asteroid belt to pick up whatever we need, water, gold, minerals, anything you want. So as you can see, behind every single one of these advances, there was a human being. This is not a miracle. There is a human being behind it. And so what I'm saying is that when you do have humans who are free to think, then you can stretch our resources into infinity. And so what we really need is more knowledge. And knowledge, unlike atoms, is potentially unlimited. Or as the Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Romer put it, we constantly fail to grasp how many ideas remain to be discovered. The difficulty is the same that we have with compounding. Possibilities do not add up, they multiply. To illustrate his point, Romer points to something as simple as composite materials. The periodic table contains about 100 different types of elements, and a recipe for a 2-element composite requires 9,900 combination, which is to say 100 times 99. And it took Homo sapiens a better part of 300,000 years to figure out that a combination of tin and copper yielded a useful composite that gave its name to the Bronze Age some 5,000 years ago. A recipe for a useful 4-element compound requires up to 94 million different combinations, which is to say 100 times 99 times 98 times 97. And once you get to 10-element compounds, Romer explains, there are more recipes than seconds since the Big Bang created the universe. So as you keep going, it becomes obvious that there have been far too few people on Earth and far too little time since we showed up for us to have tried but a minuscule fraction of all the possibilities. Future prosperity of our species, in other words, is not constrained by the physical limitations of the planet, but by the amount of knowledge that we can generate. Thank you very much. I've got some.
Marian, thank you so much for a wonderful talk. We do have time for some questions. Please do raise your hand so that we can see you. Kristen, we have one right over here in the front.
Hello? Price gouging. Some people always complain about it. I think it's a wonderful thing. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think that if I didn't agree with you, then Cato would take my membership card away, and I would have to beg for my bread at the corner of the street. Price gouging, so to speak, or price flexibility allows you to deliver goods and services to the people who value them most and who need them most. It's pointless during a hurricane or whatever else to say that a bottle of water is going to cost you only $1 if it's all going to be sold out and there is not going to be nothing for anybody to buy. So, yeah, that's how it works in real life.
I want to ask a question about my grandmother's vacuum cleaner. So my grandmother gave her vacuum cleaner to my mother, and I now have it, and I'm using it to this day. My brother did not get my grandmother's vacuum cleaner. If he's purchased 15 by now, is probably a low number. So how do you, your thoughts with respect to the disposability, thus the lost resources for today's manufacturing as compared to my grandmother's Kirby vacuum cleaner?
Yeah. Well, lucky you, because until recently, of course, the big problem for most people in the world, and I'm sure in the United States as well, was the lack of dependability of electronics and other goods. You look at any movies from the past, you had people like TV fixers or refrigerator fixers or whatever else, because there would constantly be something broken in the house. So the fact that it works, it's a borderline miracle. Look, there is going to be, so if the question is, are we using too many resources in order to produce vacuum cleaners and the analogous situation, then what I would say, clearly not, because resources are falling in price. So that tells us we have more resources. But secondly, if the question is, why isn't our stuff, quote unquote, as high quality as it used to be? Well, there is a trade-off between quality, dependability, and length of the use of a product, and then its price, right? And if you look at something like this, yes, it could be made to last much longer than it really does, but it would probably be much more expensive, which is to say that all those people who are now able to buy an iPhone but wouldn't be able to buy it if it was twice as expensive, get to enjoy it. So, I sort of rely on corporations to figure out, they certainly have more knowledge and more information than I do to figure out what is the sweet spot between dependability and the price. But yes, in a mass consumption economy, especially in a globalized world where 99% of people earn much less than the United States, than we do in the United States, what you want to do is to bring down the prices of the prices of products as low as possible, so that even people who make very little money can enjoy it. And so that's the trade-off.
So you, Paul, right over here. We'll get back to you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? So ex-Cato intern here, by the way. I normally wouldn't ask this question, but your presentation was so accelerationist, I feel I have to. If we reach the advent of AGI or the singularity or whatever you wish to call it, do you think the premise of improved, of human population acceleration's assumptions are still valid? Thank you.
It is a solution to depopulation, so in that sense, it would not be valid if we can get to AGI. Now, the difference between AI and AGI, AGI should be capable of coming up with new ideas that work, right? So LLM models, they're not really innovative. AI is currently not particularly innovative. But if you can get to a situation where AGI and artificial general intelligence can produce new ideas, such as, for example, turning gas into ammonia, artificial fertilizer, then yes, you are solving the problem of population potentially starting to decline after 2060 and there being fewer people with new ideas. AI could do that. The key is to get to AGI before the time that the population starts decreasing, right?
Mr. Snitzer.
So you argued that it's freedom that enabled China to have economic growth.
Relative freedom, obviously.
Relative,
yeah.
But they don't have elections at the national level or our conception of Bill of Rights freedoms. And so does that suggest, or do you mean to imply that those basic freedoms aren't essential also to economic growth?
They are incredibly important. What I thought I was saying, I'll make it even clearer now, is that when you have a population that is living under a totalitarian system, there are no totalitarian countries today except for North Korea, a system where you own nothing, a system where you cannot say anything without getting shot, where you cannot read anything. That was China under Mao. totalitarian control of your thoughts, of your body. And what they exchanged it for in the late 1970s and into today is an authoritarian system. Authoritarian system means that so long as you stay out of politics and keep your mouth shut about Chairman Xi, you can do absolutely anything. You can open a business, you can close a business, you can make a lot of money. So that's the key. Now, the big question, which will have serious consequences for my thinking and that of other free marketers and Cato Institute, I suppose, is can China be an innovative country moving forward into the future? So it's one thing to catch up with the developed West by adopting its technologies. The question is whether China can be on the frontier of innovation, whether it can produce the kinds of new ideas that the United States can. The theory that I subscribe to is that it cannot, and I'll modify it in a second, because people are not free to think, people are not free to associate, to speak, and so forth. Put it differently, if you're not allowed to speak, then I cannot have free thought because my thinking was not able to incorporate whatever the thoughts that you had that you were prevented from expressing. And so it would be most surprising if China was able to produce the kinds of innovations that we have here in the United States, precisely because people don't have the sorts of freedoms that we do. Now, I want to qualify it by saying that it is possible for authoritarian regimes, or even totalitarian ones, to excel in one or two things. Soviet Union, for example, had an excellent rocket program, although that was started by all the German scientists that they've captured after the Second World War. It had a very good nuclear weapons program. So whilst its people starved and they didn't have access to jeans or refrigerators and had to wait 30 years for a car, they did manage to produce 25,000 nuclear warheads, right? So it's possible for a regime like that to be on the cutting edge of one or two things. The key is, the key question for the next 10 or 20 years, will they be able to be on the cutting edge of as many things as we are? If so, then freedom obviously plays much less of a role than I thought it did.
He stole a little bit of my thunder. Could you expand
So you have to
out?
take it up with him, not me.
Could you expand that out on intellectual property rights, taxation, and also access to education?
I'm not a specialist in this area at all. I can tell you what my impression is from reading the literature, but once again, please take it with a pinch of salt. And that is that most people who are concerned about innovation see intellectual property as an enemy. If what you're concerned with is highest possible economic growth in the United States, then if that's your goal, then the less IP, the better. And the obvious exception to this, which even people who don't like intellectual property accept is an exception, would be pharmaceuticals. But aside from that, people who are concerned mostly with economic growth, as I said, would be against intellectual property, because those 10 or 15 years that you have your monopoly on your intellectual property prevents other people from using that idea in order to innovate and improve upon. One reason why the Europeans, for example, stole America's thunder in terms of aircraft building in the 1920s and the 1930s is because the Wright brothers had a very strong patent on aircraft industry, on making aircraft. And basically aircraft, because it was monopolized by Wright brothers, didn't take off for a very long time, and America fell behind. So that's one example. Your other question concerned education? What about it? Access to education. Well, I hope that we are on the cusp of really breaking the neck of the public school unions and creating a situation where our kids are going to have a completely different educational experience. If you combine, for example, AI and VR, which is to say artificial intelligence and virtual reality, you could take little Billy and put glasses on him and allow him to take a trip through a human cell or through the universe, immerse him or her in the kind of educational experience that hopefully will be much better than what American students are enjoying in the world today.
Peter, question right over here. Oh, very, very good. Jason in the back. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Fellow car enthusiast here. Mopar, no car, anyone? I'm curious, with time price, what's the relation to supply and demand?
Well, if the supply of, well, if we run out of strawberries, say, and strawberries go up 100%, but you are only making 2 or 3% more than you did last year, then obviously that will have an effect. You'll be able to buy fewer strawberries than you were. So supply and demand would function no matter whether you're using time prices or real prices or nominal prices. I think that's, if there's one universal law, it's that, yeah.
Peter, right over here.
So don't kill me, this is just a question for fun. You said this progress depends on a small fraction of the population for the intellectual benefit. Does this imply we should call the herd Soylent Green, only don't wait till they die?
Well, no, because we would never, well, aside from it being quite immoral, I dare say, we wouldn't know who the brilliant people are until they've had a lifetime to show what they are capable of.
Jason.
So you've explained quite well what happens when a resource gets used perhaps too much, it rises in price. You find reasons to sort of create a way to sort of create that resource some other way. When you have an unpriced resource, like pieces of the environment and things like that, how do you deal with that? I mean, the current thinking on why we should use less resources has less to do with Malthus and more to do with global warming, that if we use too much in the way we produce too much, it will create bad things and ice caps will melt, et cetera, et cetera. How do you sort of do that and find a solution in a market way?
Yes, so we deliberately didn't talk about climate change, because if we talked about climate change in the book, and if we wanted to give it justice, do it justice, then we would need another book to write about climate change, right? So there are two strands of thought within the, what I would say, climate apocalyptic part of the intellectual sphere. I don't mean that dismissively. I'm concerned about the climate just like any other person, I think. But there are two different strands. One of them deals with climate change and we leave that to other people, and the other one deals with resources and stuff that pertains to it. And the book is devoted to resources, not climate change. Now, in terms of climate change, I think that the best way to accomplish what we want to accomplish is through technological change, through technological innovation. Look, with the best of wills, if we all here agreed that we need to use less fuel and less materials in order to protect the planet from increased temperature, it's just not going to happen. We can see that the American people are very price sensitive when it comes to things like price of gas, and you know, rightly so, and they are simply not going to put up with the sorts of things that the Europeans have been putting up for a number of decades, and which they are stopping to put up with. In other words, we as Americans, I'm an American citizen now, by the way, as Americans, we are simply not going to go further in the direction of Europe. We are going away, and Europe is going further away from the direction of Europe, where Europe is. Prices of electricity are 5 times as high in Britain as they are in the United States. Entire industries are shuttering in Germany because they cannot supply energy. So that's not the answer. Restricting consumption is not the answer. We have to solve the problem of climate change. It's not a crisis, but it is a problem. We need to solve it by, for example, nuclear power, be it fusion or fission. Right now, fission. Well, I mean, let's be frank. If the people who are most to blame for climate change are the Greens, who have shut down the progress of nuclear power in the 1970s. If they didn't win, the world would have been covered by now by fission reactors, and we wouldn't be worrying or talking about climate change. And if there is a problem, And if there's you know, given the hysteria and the black legend which there is about fission, then hopefully we can win the war on we can not on fusion, but we can win in favor of fusion and have that as a replacement. And of course, in the future, you would expect that there's going to be a continuation of progress in electric vehicles and other types of transport. Our heating systems are going to become ever more efficient. So, you know, we have time and we have a lot of smart people working on it. Sorry, it's a long answer, but it's a very complex question.
One more question right here.
I have a question really and a comment, and this has to do with one of your key theses is the average real wage, right? And if you look at the average real wage, what we've been seeing over time with more innovation is we are seeing not a bell curve, but rather a shift where we're generating huge amounts of wealth by a smaller number of people. And I wonder what your thought economically is on the consequence of really inequality that we may see with your modeling and progress.
Sure. So we knew that if we used average hourly wage in the United States, nobody would take the book seriously and we would be dismissed on the spot. And that is why we have chosen blue-collar wages and unskilled wages. There is no average wage mentioned in terms of the United States in the book because it's the easiest thing to attack. Nobody's making that hourly wage because, you know, Elon Musk and people like him are skewing the distribution. So we are just looking at two types of worker. A blue-collar worker, somebody may be in manufacturing, making a car or whatever, and unskilled laborer, a janitor. And everything is pointing towards superabundance. And that is why in the 2 years that the book has been out, nobody has attacked its methodology. So,
ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Marian Tupy. Thank you, Marian. Wonderful talk. We look forward to seeing everyone back here on Monday for our program, our Civil Roundtable, The Lincoln Miracle, the 1860 convention that changed history. Everyone have a wonderful night. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you next Monday. Oh, one last thing, QR code. If you'd give us your thoughts on the program tonight, we would greatly appreciate it, and thoughts of coming programs. And finally, we do have some students in the room. If you want to come up front, we'd love to get a picture of you with our speaker. Again, thank you very much. Have a wonderful night. Thank you.
John, if the students would come back to the book table, we'll do the picture back here.
We're going to do the picture back at the book table.
We do have more books to sell.
Thank you, Jason. We do have books to sell in the back. Thank you.